At WWE 25 Survivor Series, 1997, Bret Hart vs. With the celebration of the infamous Montreal Screwjob featuring Shawn Michaels on Wednesday, we wanted to point out that Dave Meltzer has covered all of the crud from these particular issues of the Wrestling Observer newsletter. This will go down in history as the most famous monopoly of a wrestling match in the modern era, Dave said at the time. Winning on November 17, 1997 did something with a daily breakdown of what was going on and who was involved in the full chapter of the 1997 annual book. This will go down in history as the most famous finish in a professional wrestling match in the modern era. 20 or 30 years from now, more than famous wrestler jump promotions, any celebrity, and any record house home will be remembered by anyone who watches it live, and it will be remembered later on. The last minute of this match will live on forever, thanks to the magic of the videotape, and will be replayed literally millions of times by tens of thousands of people searching for the smallest details for this strange puzzle. But these few seconds were more than a year ago. The story of the story that led to it getting started is much more reminiscent of the dirty swindler in the industry's past than what the current $1 million company tried to establish a front line over the company in the misleading way that the firm in the industry has evolved. October 20, 1996. Hours after Bret Hart was about to make the biggest decision of his life, which was to win the biggest bidding battle in professional wrestling history, he was in a hotel room in San Jose, California. Despite being quite inclined to stay in the World Wrestling Federation despite a much bigger offer from World Championship Wrestling, he had changed his mind several times in the previous 2 weeks due to new offers from both sides. Eric Bischoff and Kevin Nash were always trying to persuade him to change his mind and show what a wonderful life he had with an easier schedule. Bischoff offered big money and was on his way to becoming a movie star. A goal Hart had been in semi-retirement from wrestling since he dropped the title to Shawn Michaels at WrestleMania a few months ago. Vince McMahon offers himself, in the immortal words of Arn Anderson, not only a spotlight, but also the company's pinnacle, the chance to become the life of WWF for an important place that will determine the future direction of the company. Many of Hart's close advisors tried to say that telling him to go to WCW was the best move for him, and more importantly, his future after wrestling. But he clearly turned down the offer, which was largely unfaithful, and that wasn't the only factor involved. Determined not to lose an obvious fight, McMahon offered himself a famous contract of nearly 20 years after retiring for nearly 3 years, which made it almost as enjoyable as the first time when it came to the booking process. Hart will earn somewhere around $1.5 million a year as an active wrestler, and a healthy, but much lesser figure working the front office for 17 years after retirement as an active wrestler. As part of McMahon's proposal, it will also allow Hart to explain live on television that the decision-making process should be signed with WCW. Hart flew to Fort Wayne. Here the WWF was recording live Raw after verbally accepting the deal, signing the contract, and telling the interview that he would stay in the WWF forever, attempting to position himself as top baby and perennial champion until he finished his active career gloriously at sunset as Hogan, Savage. He would say. And neither were the other superstars before him. As with wrestling, it's not all of the promised scenarios that everyone thought would happen as originally planned. A little over a year later, the feelings between McMahon and Hart had turned 180 degrees, to a degree that no one believed. March 10, 1997. High-end baby care didn't last long as McMahon asked her to flip the heel. While Hart initially looked at the idea, 3 days later McMahon presented him with 2 lists. One list stated that their nominated rivals were babyface, Vader, Mankind, and Steve Austin. The other roster featured nominated rivals as heel, Undertaker, Michaels, and Austin. Hart agreed to cash out. He'll put up a better roster of rivals, and he and McMahon decided he would return babyface and end his career on a positive note during the last few months of his contract. He and Steve Austin played twice at WrestleMania. Hart then brought up the anti-American angle that he would stay a stroller in Canada and Europe and interview if most people were going to tell the truth. So he made a reasonable statement when the time came to return to the United States. September 8, 1997. Vince McMahon and Bret Hart had their first meeting, where McMahon approached Hart seriously about his contract. About 3 months ago, McMahon had told Hart that the company was in bad financial straits, and that they might have to defer some of the money until they were then contracted. This time his approach was more of a blank spot. He wanted to cut Hart's regular salary by more than half, to about $30,000 a week, and defer the remaining money until the end of his contract term until the company could be better formed financially. Hart rejected this proposal because he didn't want to risk not getting the money in the future after all this devastation. September 20, 1997. About an hour before the start of the PPV show in Birmingham, England, McMahon approached Davey Boy Smith and asked him to take over Shawn Michaels for the European title that night. Smith was ostensibly shocked to say that Michaels would do business for him, as he told everything in the making of the series, promising to be the land of Europe. The explanation that makes business sense and still makes sense is that they wanted to build for a second PPV from Smith's former hometown of Manchester, England, and Smith would regain the title. In the same scenario, WWF, Psycho SID, he caught the attention of 60,000 fans in San Antonio with Michaels, who was working on a program with, so while it all made sense, he hadn't been able to come close to the idea just before the show started. McMahon approached Hart about working with Michaels around the same time. Hart said he has a problem with this as Michaels still hasn't apologized for the Sunny Days comment, and it would be hard for someone to trust the past like the ring itself. And he had told McMahon that a few weeks before Michaels made it clear that he would not be working with anyone at the Hart Foundation, he didn't trust Bret or Owen, and that he eventually agreed to just work with Smith. September 22, 1997. On the Raw recording day at Madison Square Garden, McMahon said they would deliberately violate his contract because he couldn't afford a settlement in a feud with Bret Hart's apartment. He told a shocked Hart that he needed to go to World Championship Wrestling and do everything he could with this group. Hart described the suggestion, "I didn't feel comfortable doing it. I feel like an old prisoner in a prison where I know all the guards and all the inmates and have the best cell. Why would I want to go to a new prison where I don't know the guards and inmates, and where I know I have the best cell for longer? I felt really bad." There was an escape clause included in Hart's contract because there was so much bargaining power when WWF made the deal 11 months ago.